Sage of Dinosaurs. Life Before Humans Part 1. The Dawn of Dinosaurs Chapter 1. The first stirrings. The world was still young when the first true forms of life stirred upon the land. The sun, an immense golden eye, hovered low in a vast and boundless sky. It watched over the sprawling plains, the mighty forests, and the endless seas. The earth itself, alive with volcanic breath and tectonic heaves, groaned with the slow passage of time. This was an ancient world, vibrant with life, yet unknowing of what was to come. It was here, in this primeval cradle, that the first dinosaurs began to awaken to their existence. The slow rise of consciousness began deep in the thick jungles where the sun barely kissed the forest floor. The towering cycads and ferns created a world that shimmered with moisture and light, casting the ground below in an emerald gloom. It was here, under the cover of dense canopies, that Ichthar, a creature of deep thought and primitive wisdom, moved silently. Ichthar was an eoraptor, slender and quick, but more than merely a hunter. To Ichthar, the jungle was not simply a place to find prey. It was a world to be known, a web of connections that pulsed with the energy of life. Every leaf carried the scent of its past, each broken twig echoed the tread of some earlier step. Ichthar's mind was not limited to the present moment. He perceived time as a river flowing through the forest, with each ripple telling a story of what had been and what was yet to come. The jungle spoke to him in whispers, in symbols, in signs. What are we? Ichthar often wondered as he paused in his movement, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his claws. He was not the first to ask this. There were others in the shadows, larger creatures who roamed with thoughts equally vast. He felt their presence, their contemplations. Was existence merely the struggle to survive, the pursuit of prey and the evasion of predators? Or was there something deeper, something that connected all living beings in this endless cycle? As Ichthar mused on this, his senses tingled. He could feel the vibration of the air, the scent of heat and life approaching from the north. A heavy footstep echoed across the plains, the unmistakable tread of one of the great herbivores. Kethra, an enormous plateosaurus, was lumbering through the forest. Her presence was like the rolling of thunder, her massive form parting the trees like waves. Her mind, though slow and ponderous, was filled with a kind of wisdom that Ichthar envied but could not fully comprehend. Kethra did not think in words but in memories. Her kind experienced time in cycles, endless rotations of seasons and migrations, the patterns etched into the very marrow of their bones. For Kethra, life was not fragmented but continuous, each moment a link in an unbroken chain that stretched beyond memory into a timeless past. The earth is old, she would think, feeling the ancient vibrations of the land beneath her great feet. Older than the trees, older than the stars. The weight of this knowledge pressed on her, guiding her slow, deliberate steps. She felt the pull of the stars themselves as she moved, a silent beckoning from the distant places in the sky. She could not name the stars, but she knew them as well as the shifting patterns of the seasons, and she often wondered if one day her kind would reach them. Above them both, gliding on thermals high above the canopy, a third mind surveyed the land below. Vale, a pterosaur with wings as wide as the sky, cut through the winds with a grace that belied the ancient intelligence within him. Vale, unlike the others, thought not of the earth but of the endless expanse of the heavens. He felt connected to the wind, to the clouds, and to the distant mountains that loomed like sentinels over the landscape. The air was his ocean, and he swam in it with purpose and delight, his mind always reaching beyond the horizon. Vale's thoughts were expansive, filled with abstract wonderings about the nature of movement and time. His kind had no need for roots, they existed in a constant state of flux, always in motion, always seeking. Vale often contemplated the meaning of flight itself. Was it merely a way to survive, to escape the predators below, or was it something more? Did it represent the freedom of the mind to soar beyond the confines of the earth? As Vale spiraled downward, he spotted something that caught his attention, a group of small psittacosaurus gathered around a shallow pool. He descended quietly, alighting on a nearby rock to observe their behavior. These smaller creatures, though often overlooked by the larger predators, had developed intricate social structures. They communicated in soft whistles and clicks, their eyes constantly moving, watching for signs of danger but also engaging in playful interactions. At the center of the group, Soaring, a particularly clever Psittacosaurus, stood watching the water. Her mind was sharp, attuned to the subtlest of changes in the environment. Soaring was not just a follower of instinct, she was a thinker. The reflections in the water fascinated her, and she often found herself pondering the duality of the world she saw. Was the reflection real? Could it be touched? Did it hold the essence of something more profound? Soaring approached the water's edge cautiously, peering at her own reflection. The surface rippled as a breeze passed, distorting the image, and she stepped back, confused yet intrigued. Is this who I am? She wondered. Or is this something else? Her contemplation was interrupted as one of her companions nudged her playfully, and the moment passed, but the question lingered in her mind like a seed awaiting the right conditions to grow. These dinosaurs, so different in form, in size, in perception, were united by a common thread: the stirrings of consciousness. They each experienced the world in unique ways, yet they all shared a sense of something larger, something that extended beyond the immediate need for survival. The world was alive with meaning, and they, in their own ways, were beginning to understand that they were part of something vast and eternal. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Ichthar, Kethra, Vale, and Soaring each found themselves pausing to consider the fading light. For a brief moment, they were all connected in thought, feeling the pulse of the world around them, sensing the first stirrings of an ancient wisdom that would continue to grow and evolve through the ages. And so, under the dying light of the primordial sun, the first civilizations of thought were born. Chapter 2. A new consciousness. The sky was an endless expanse of azure, marbled with pale streaks of cloud, as if the heavens themselves were being painted by some unseen hand. The sun's light filtered through the forest canopies, dappling the ground with patterns that shifted with the breeze. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the chorus of life, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and the distant, thunderous footsteps of giants who wandered this ancient land. But something more profound stirred within the hearts of these creatures, a sense that transcended mere survival. There, in the dense undergrowth of the fern-laden forest, a small dinosaur paused amidst its hunt. Ilaris, an inquisitive Coelophysis, had long since learned the art of hunting with precision. His sleek, nimble form moved silently, every step measured, every muscle poised to spring. But on this day, he found his mind troubled by something that gnawed at him more deeply than hunger. His gaze flickered from the beetle that scuttled across a leaf to the shadows beyond, where larger shapes moved in the distance, dimly perceived through the haze of humidity. He could sense them, great beasts that stirred the earth with their movements, their minds vast and unknowable. Ilaris was smaller, but his mind was awakening to something beyond the instinctual drives that governed his existence. Who am I? The thought drifted into his consciousness like the ripples of a pebble dropped in still water, an unfamiliar current that unsettled him. His usual focus on the world outside of himself faltered, and instead, he began to consider himself, as if for the first time. His talons flexed in the soil, and he watched the delicate muscles in his own limbs, marveling at the intricacy of his own body. He felt the blood pulsing through him, the steady rhythm of life, but it was more than that. It was awareness, the sudden realization that he was not merely a part of the forest but a creature with a separate existence. Am I different from the others? He wondered. His keen eyes darted to his kin, who moved through the brush with similar purpose, sleek bodies sleek and angular, their minds driven by the need to hunt and survive. But Ilaris began to sense a divide. They lived in the present, reacting to the now. Ilaris felt the weight of something more, an awareness of time, a realization that the present was fleeting, that the past and future were just as real, even if they could not be touched. He felt a longing to understand more, to grasp the meaning of his existence, though the answers eluded him. The wind stirred, and with it came the scent of rain, rich and full. Ilaris lifted his snout and closed his eyes, letting the coolness wash over him. For the first time, he savored not just the utility of the rain but the sensation of it, the way it caressed his skin. He marveled at how the world around him was so full of sensations, and he, a creature of flesh and thought, could feel them. Farther up the slope, standing near the ridge where the sun bathed the land in a soft golden hue, Tythra, a wise and solitary stegosaurus, grazed on the cycads that grew in clusters along the hillside. She moved with a grace that belied her size, each step deliberate, her plaited tail sweeping in gentle arcs behind her. To those who did not know her, she seemed ponderous, a simple grazer whose only concern was the bounty of leaves that grew in the fertile valley. But within her mind, a deeper contemplation had begun to take root. Tythra had been watching the world for many cycles, and with each passing season, she grew more attuned to its rhythms. Her mind stretched beyond the immediacy of hunger or the need for shelter. She had begun to see the patterns that governed her world, the cycles of life, the rise and fall of the sun, the changing constellations that dotted the night sky. She pondered their meanings as one might ponder a great puzzle. As she lowered her head to the ferns, her mind wandered to the stars she had often observed during the quiet nights. The stars were ancient and distant, yet they felt connected to her in some indefinable way. She could not name them, but she sensed that they had witnessed countless ages pass, that they knew the secrets of the earth long before she was born. Tythra's thoughts drifted across the eons, wondering if she, too, was part of some great cosmic design. Her mind wandered deeper still, to the question that had begun to haunt her: what is my purpose? She had observed the world for many years, had seen life and death dance their eternal waltz, and yet the answer to this question remained elusive. Was she simply to exist, to graze and wander the earth, or was there something more that she was meant to discover? She felt the stirrings of a truth she could not yet grasp, a sense that her existence was part of a larger whole, that she and the other creatures of this world were bound by something greater than instinct. In the distance, a great cry echoed across the plains, and Tirnak, a massive allosaurus, let his gaze sweep across the horizon. His keen eyes narrowed, not from hunger or the scent of prey, but from a newfound sense of curiosity. He had always been a hunter, his life driven by the pursuit of strength and dominance, the unending cycle of predator and prey. But recently, Tirnak had begun to sense something more stirring within him, a question that gnawed at the edges of his mind. Tirnak had been contemplating the meaning of strength. He had always assumed it was a matter of power, of teeth and claws, of surviving and outlasting those around him. Yet now, as he stood upon the ridge, watching the herd of smaller herbivores move below, he wondered if true strength was something different. Was it the ability to dominate, or was it the ability to endure, to protect, to understand the forces that shaped this world? The sky above darkened as clouds rolled in, and a storm began to brew on the horizon. Tirnak watched the gathering tempest with a strange calmness. There was power in the storm, in the way the winds howled and the lightning cracked, but it was not a destructive power alone. The storm brought renewal, a cleansing of the earth, a reminder that all things, even the mighty, were subject to forces greater than themselves. Tirnak found himself contemplating his place in this world. He was not merely a hunter, he was part of the vast, interconnected web of life. Perhaps strength was not in taking life, but in respecting it. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Tirnak turned his gaze toward the distant horizon, where the earth and sky met in a vast, unknowable expanse. The storm was coming, but so was something more profound, a deeper understanding of his place in the world, and with it, the realization that life was not just a battle for survival, but a journey of discovery, of meaning. And so, in this ancient world, under the watchful eyes of the stars and the ever-changing sky, the first stirrings of consciousness began to bloom. These dinosaurs, once governed only by instinct, were beginning to ask the questions that would shape their futures. They were not just creatures of flesh and bone. They were thinkers, dreamers, and seekers of truth. In their own ways, they were waking up to the great mysteries of existence, questions of purpose, identity, and the infinite web of life to which they all belonged. Chapter 3. The language of roars. The air was thick with the scent of moisture and the faint hum of insects, a delicate symphony that filled the verdant jungle. The sun had just begun its descent behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the vast plains. A chorus of life stirred in the twilight, a chorus that was not limited to the rustle of leaves or the scuttle of small creatures, but one that resonated through the very fabric of the land. Here, where life teemed in its myriad forms, an ancient language was taking shape, one that was both primal and profound. At the heart of the dense forest, beneath the towering canopy of cycads and ferns, Viraxa, a Maiasaura, stood in a glade, her senses attuned to the vibrations in the air. Her kind were known for their complex social structures, their deep bonds with one another that extended far beyond mere survival. She had long been a leader among her herd, not due to brute strength but because of her mind, a mind capable of grasping subtleties and guiding her companions through the shifting tides of this ancient world. Viraxa's eyes, deep and bright, flicked across the glade, where her young ones foraged with curiosity. Her mind was alight with thought, yet her communication was not reliant on mere instinct or physical gestures. The language of her kind was a language of roars, of subtle intonations, and of movements so precise that they conveyed meaning deeper than any simple vocalization. Each call was deliberate, each gesture woven into a complex tapestry of sound and intent. It was a language not born from words but from the very essence of life itself. Viraxa emitted a low, rumbling hum, a sound that reverberated through the air like the growl of distant thunder. The hum was not one of warning or aggression but one of inquiry, a question posed to her young ones as they ventured near a patch of unfamiliar plants. The sound rippled through the air, and the young Maiasaura paused, their heads turning toward her, sensing the meaning embedded in her call. It was not simply a noise, it was a subtle invitation to reflect upon the plants before them, to consider whether they were safe to eat or whether caution was required. The young ones responded in kind, emitting short, staccato sounds, like the patter of rain against stone. Viraxa listened intently, parsing the delicate nuances in their calls. They were uncertain, curious, and eager, their tones suggesting they had yet to fully grasp the dangers that lay hidden beneath the lush surface of their world. Viraxa's hum deepened into a resonant thrum, a more authoritative sound, urging them to wait, to consider. And in their waiting, they understood. They had spoken without speaking, heard without words. Beyond the forest, upon a rocky plateau overlooking the Great Plains, Kales, an imposing Tyrannosaurus rex, stood surveying his territory. His presence was a shadow cast long upon the land, his form colossal and powerful. But Kales was not a creature of brute force alone. The world saw him as a terror, a predator of unmatched strength, but within his massive skull stirred a mind that grasped the complexities of existence far more than others knew. Kales's thoughts were vast and ponderous, and his communication was equally nuanced. His kind did not chatter meaninglessly. Every sound, every rumble from deep within his chest carried layers of meaning, capable of expressing concepts far more intricate than mere dominance or hunger. In his solitude, Kales had begun to understand that even the wind had its language, the earth its song. And his own voice, a resonant roar that could shake the trees, had power beyond the physical. It could convey ideas, emotions, even philosophies. In the twilight, Kales raised his head to the heavens and released a sound that reverberated across the plains. The roar began as a low growl, building into a booming crescendo that echoed into the distance. But this was no mere display of dominance. Within the sound was something more, something that spoke of his contemplation of the world. His roar carried the weight of his thoughts, thoughts of the stars that twinkled above and the endless horizon that lay before him. It was a question sent out into the void. What is beyond this world? From the far side of the plateau, an answering call came. It was not the roar of another predator but the deep, melodic call of Seriphus, a great diplodocus who moved with the grace of a giant across the plains. Seriphus and Kales were of different worlds, one an herbivore who grazed the endless fields, the other a carnivore who ruled the hunt. Yet in the twilight, their roars carried across the land like ancient philosophers calling to one another across the distance. Seriphus's reply was slow and deliberate, a deep bellow that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself. In his call, Kales sensed a kindred spirit, one who also pondered the mysteries of existence. "We are of the earth," Seriphus seemed to say in the long, slow cadence of his bellow, "but we are more than the sum of our flesh." Kales remained silent for a time, letting the wind carry the echoes of Seriphus's call into the night. It was not an answer, but it was a response, a recognition that he was not alone in his search for meaning. Their language, born from the primal roars of their kind, had become something more, an exchange of ideas, a dialogue that spanned the vast plains and carried with it the weight of their shared existence. In another part of the forest, near a swift-flowing river, a group of velociraptors gathered in the dusk. They were smaller than the great giants of the plains but no less intelligent. Their society was built on cooperation, on the intricate interplay of minds working together toward a common goal. Lyra, their leader, stood at the edge of the group, her sharp eyes flicking between her companions. Their communication was swift, efficient, a series of clicks, chirps, and soft growls that conveyed strategy and intent with precision. Lyra tilted her head, emitting a sequence of rapid clicks that resonated like the tapping of stone. The others responded in kind, their voices creating a rhythm, a shared understanding. Their language was not only spoken through sound but also through movement, subtle shifts in posture, the flick of a tail, the tilt of a head. Each gesture held meaning, each sound was a part of a greater conversation, as they worked together to plan their next hunt. But beyond the immediate need for survival, Lyra's mind wandered. She often found herself contemplating the nature of their collective intelligence. Her pack moved as one, their minds connected in ways that transcended simple communication. It was as if they shared a single mind, a unity of purpose that went deeper than any one individual's thoughts. Is this what makes us stronger? Lyra mused. Our ability to think as one, to share our knowledge, to act in harmony? As the night deepened, the raptors moved silently into the shadows, their collective language continuing, unspoken and unheard by any but themselves. It was a language of connection, of unity, a language that allowed them to work together with a precision that no lone creature could achieve. The dinosaurs of this world had evolved not only in body but in mind. Their language, though not bound by words or syntax, was a language of roars, of movements, of sounds that carried meaning far beyond the surface. It was a language that spoke of their shared existence, of their deep connection to the earth and to one another. It was a language that reflected the complexity of their minds, a language that would continue to evolve as they themselves grew in understanding. In the vast expanse of this primeval world, the dinosaurs had found a way to speak. Though their words were not like ours, they were no less profound. They had discovered the language of life itself, a language that transcended mere survival and hinted at the beginnings of something much greater, the birth of a new consciousness. Chapter 4. Territorial instincts. The land spread out beneath the setting sun like a vast and intricate tapestry, its contours etched by the slow passage of time and the movements of those who called it home. To the untrained eye, the landscape might have seemed indifferent, a wilderness of tangled forests, open plains, and winding rivers, but to the ancient minds that inhabited this place, it was far more than a backdrop for survival. The land was memory, purpose, and identity, woven into the very bones of those who walked upon it. For the dinosaurs, territory was not simply a place to exist, it was an extension of themselves, a reflection of their instincts, their fears, and their deepest desires. Rallus, a mighty Carcharodontosaurus, stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the lowlands where the river wound its way through the verdant jungle. His eyes, dark and piercing, surveyed the territory below with an intensity born not of hunger but of something more profound. To Rallus, this land was not simply his hunting ground, it was his domain, the very essence of his being, as inseparable from him as the teeth that gleamed beneath his scaled lips. In his mind, the land and his body were one. The river's flow mirrored the coursing of his blood, the rolling hills the rise and fall of his own breath. His senses were attuned to every subtle change in his surroundings, the tremor of the earth beneath his feet, the shifting patterns of wind, the distant calls of creatures both familiar and strange. Every inch of this place carried his scent, his presence, and any who dared trespass into his domain did so at their peril. But why was it so? Why did he guard these boundaries so fiercely? As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains, Rallus allowed his mind to wander, to delve into the ancient impulses that drove him. His need for territory was not merely instinctual, it was something deeper, something rooted in the primal rhythms of existence. In this place, he knew who he was. Here, in the valleys and hills that bore his mark, his purpose was clear. The land was a mirror, reflecting his power and dominance, his connection to the ancient cycles of life and death. It was more than just soil and stone, it was a stage upon which the story of his life played out. Yet, even as Rallus mused on his connection to the land, he felt the creeping edge of doubt. What is territory but an illusion? He wondered, his thoughts drifting like shadows across the landscape. Does the earth truly belong to me, or do I belong to it? The river would flow whether he walked its banks or not, the trees would grow, and the mountains would rise and fall long after he was gone. Was his fierce protection of this land a true reflection of his nature, or merely a fleeting grasp at something that could never truly be owned? As these questions gnawed at the edges of his mind, a movement caught his eye. Far below, near the river's edge, a smaller figure moved with deliberate grace. It was Saria, a lithe Deinonychus whose pack had recently settled along the riverbanks. Saria was a thinker, her mind sharp and quick like the claws that adorned her feet, and her connection to territory was as complex as her thoughts. Saria had always understood territory not as a symbol of power but as a delicate balance of resources, security, and cooperation. For her and her pack, the land was life, a place that provided food, shelter, and safety. But it was also a place of shared memory, a place where bonds were forged and where the young learned the ways of survival. Territory was not just a physical space, it was a social construct, a web of relationships that extended beyond her own life to those of her kin. And yet, Saria knew that territory was fragile, constantly shifting like the sands along the riverbanks. As she moved silently through the tall grasses, Saria pondered the delicate nature of her existence within this ever-changing world. Her pack relied on the land to sustain them, yet they could not control it. They had to remain adaptable, always vigilant, ready to move if the rains failed or if predators grew too numerous. Territory, to Saria, was not something to be defended at all costs but something to be managed, nurtured, and sometimes surrendered. It was not a matter of dominance but of wisdom, an understanding that the land, like life, was fleeting, and that survival depended on cooperation and adaptability rather than brute force. Her mind flickered with thoughts of the past, of the many times her ancestors had been forced to move, to abandon one territory for another, to leave behind the familiar in search of the unknown. Does territory belong to us, or do we belong to it? She wondered, echoing Rallis's unspoken question. The earth had shaped her kind just as much as they had shaped it, and in that shaping, a deep connection had formed, one that transcended mere survival. It was a connection born of memory, of knowledge passed down through generations, of stories told in the whispers of the wind and the rustle of leaves. As Saria continued her silent patrol along the river, she caught sight of movement to the west, a flicker of light and shadow among the trees. She paused, her senses heightened, her mind sharp as she assessed the potential threat. It was Tyneth, a solitary Quetzalcoatlus whose massive wings cast long shadows over the forest floor as he glided through the twilight sky. Tyneth was a creature of the air, his relationship with territory entirely different from those bound to the earth. For Tyneth, territory was not defined by borders but by the currents of the wind and the heights of the mountains. His world was fluid, ever-changing, his dominion stretching across vast distances as he soared above the land. The birth of a new consciousness. Chapter 4. Territorial instincts. Instead, he existed in harmony with the sky, navigating the invisible pathways that crisscrossed the heavens. His thoughts were not bound by the constraints of land but soared freely, like the wind that carried him. Yet even Tyneth, with his vast wings and endless horizons, understood the importance of territory in his own way. He relied on specific roosting places, sacred spots where the thermals were strong and the cliffs provided shelter from storms. These places were his anchor points, his connection to the earth below, and though he did not defend them with the same ferocity as Rallis or Saria, he understood their importance. Territory, to Tyneth, was not a place to be controlled but a sanctuary to be respected, a place where he could rest between his journeys, where he could feel the pulse of the earth beneath his talons. As Tyneth soared higher, catching a strong updraft that lifted him toward the darkening sky, his mind wandered to the stars that would soon appear. He had always been drawn to the stars, to the way they seemed to beckon him with their distant light. They were his true territory, vast and untouchable, a reminder that even the earth was but a small part of a much greater whole. Perhaps, Tyneth thought as he glided effortlessly through the air, territory is not something that we claim, but something that claims us. In the twilight of this ancient world, as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, the dinosaurs of this land continued to ponder their place within it. Territory was not merely a battleground for dominance, it was a reflection of their inner selves, a mirror of their instincts and their thoughts. It was a concept both simple and complex, born from the ancient rhythms of life and death, shaped by the ever-changing forces of nature. And as they moved through their world, they carried with them the knowledge that territory was more than just land, it was memory, identity, and a connection to something far greater than themselves.